Lost Wolf sort of began, I guess, in the 90s. My dad, my family lived on a vineyard, and being a man in a family of women, and his name being Wolfgang, he was a little bit of a lost wolf in the family, and that's sort of where the name came. So we had a beautiful vineyard out in Stonewell. Dad worked in the packaging industry, producing labels for many of the well-known names here in the Barossa, Peter Lehmann and the like. And the opportunity came for his good friend that lived across the road, David Powell, at Tallbrick to make some wine for us back in the 90s. He also used Charlie Melton at times as well to make our wine in the 90s also. And as I was saying before, yeah, Lost Wolf came from being the only wolf in a family of females. So the wine was always supposed to be a small family wine, and the passion for it sort of grew into the early 2000s, where it then came. Dad sort of changed careers a little bit and started with Treasury Wine Estate, and he decided to take a bit of a step back from the wine. And it was a bit of a hiatus for Lost Wolf for a few years until his daughter, myself, started getting into a bit more wine, and there was an opportunity from some family friends to buy some grapes in 2017. And we got a parcel of Grenache and Shiraz, and we decided, to bring Lost Wolf back to life. So you can see a bit of a difference with the labels here. As I sort of touched on earlier, my dad, he started with labels. So he's had a real passion for labels. And what we really wanted to do with these labels here was incorporate modern techniques with old techniques. So the wolf is, your modern printing on this lovely paper here. And then the letters that you can see are done with an over 60-year-old letter press. So it's offset printer pressing to create just a different kind of texture and a different kind of look. So Dad incorporating that modern and old technique, and really sort of goes back to the family's roots. As Dad's father came across here from the Netherlands in quite some time ago, in the 60s, and started a print business here in the Barossa. So the whole Lost Wolf concept, I guess, really ties back to our family's roots, and we really wanted to portray that through with our labelling here. Each label, is not completely identical. There can be slightly variants with the ink that comes through, and I think that's just such a special way of showing that not everything has to be, perfect. And with bottles of wine, as well, that there's variants in the taste and the different vintages. All these different variables that create the different stories through, the taste of the wine, but the label is sort of, I guess, the initial story that you see when you pick up a bottle off the shelf, and we just really sort of wanted to tell that through our wines here. In 2017 is where the conversations sort of began for Lost Wolf and the resurgence of Lost Wolf. We created the wine first, Grenache and Shiraz that we have here. So the whole idea with our wines is sort of minimal intervention and big flavour, and quite a bit of time in barrel, as we wanted wines. We still have wines from the 90s when Lost Wolf was first started that we're still enjoying now. And the idea with these wines was to make sure that they had a great longevity to be enjoyed for the years to come. So the Grenache here spends 20 months in really old French oak before we bottle it, and we still keep it aside for a couple of years just to make sure that the wines are at their best level for enjoyment. The Shiraz as well spends 20 months in oak, but it spends similar, so it's in old French oak, but we put new American oak hogsheads in the end. So the Grenache is 100% Grenache, whereas the Shiraz has a bit of Cabernet dabbled in there. Dad likes to say that a Barossa Shiraz needs Cabernet and Cabernet needs Shiraz, and it's sort of like putting salt on your steak. So it has about 5% Cabernet dabbled through the Shiraz there. So the Grenache is one of my personal favourites, I would say. It's not your classic strawberries and cream Grenache. It's very fruity, almost has a smokiness to it that I love, but it just goes, it goes well by itself. It goes well with pizza. It's just one of those Friday night, I want something nice to drink. I've had a hard week at work. It's one of those bottles that you just, you have one glass and it sort of beckons you to have another glass, and then the bottle's gone. And the Shiraz is the same, very, very drinkable. Has you know, those classic Barossa flavors coming through. You know, Barossa Shiraz is just really unmistakable, I think, when you do compare it to. We're pretty spoilt here in South Australia with our regions, but without any bias, I will say Barossa Shiraz, I think, really has a distinction. So you might see here as well, we have our Reserve Shiraz. Now this one has a really interesting story behind it, as we had, it was a great vintage, as I mentioned before, in 2017 for Barossa Shiraz, and we had quite a number of barrels, and Dad decided that he wanted to pick just one special barrel, the family barrel, that he would call our special Reserve Shiraz. So the pick of the best barrels that had the best flavour, and we would bottle it separately from our core Shiraz here. Now Dad went through, and I think there was about 15 or so barrels that he went through, and he picked his top 2. And then he set up all these samples from all the barrels for my sister, my partner, and my mum and I to try. We somehow all picked the same 2 barrels. And I know that sounds made up, but we genuinely picked the same 2 barrels, and it was going to be just one barrel to the side, but because we unanimously picked these 2 barrels, we decided that we had to put them both aside for our family reserve here. So you can see it's a slightly different label to our core range here. Our family has a really close relationship, and when it comes to vintage time, juggling between our other jobs, and you know, Dad calling like the grapes have come in, and you know, you've got to run down, and you know, you've got to get your hands dirty, and you know, crushing the grapes, you know, coming over here for you know, the regular pump overs. It's almost like having a child when, you know, you've got your feeding time and whatnot, you know, like, oh, it's been 3 hours, we need to go back and we need to pump the wine over and whatnot. You know, just this year, my sister sort of ticked something off her bucket list of getting in the grapes and using her feet and stomping them down. So that was quite a sight to behold. Had to hose her down afterwards, but you know, things like that. Getting your hands dirty. You know, all of these bottles are hand labelled by us. You know, they're all numbered as well, hand numbered. So we've got an old school number that we hand press down ourselves. You know, each, you know, from picking the grape off the vine to, you know, doing the crushing, the pressing, the time that it spends in the barrel, to then, you know, not lovingly but almost lovingly, you know, labeling the bottle, you know, putting it in the box for someone to enjoy. You know, the thing I love about wine is that you don't just drink it because it's nice. Usually there's an occasion, you're having dinner with your family, you're on a first date, you know, so many different things like that I think are so important about wine. Wine tells a story and then becomes a part of a story. You know, times where Dad and I talk about beautiful wines that we've had before, and it's a sort of memory that you have, an occasion, and we just love the idea of being part of people's dinner tables and dinner and lunches and presents and all sorts of things like that. So I think that's really sort of a family sort of idea of this is that it's something for us, but something to share with other people.